if you're giving a general positive reference on someone, you might not like them, but you know it's in your best interest to be positive, you'll keep it as brief as you possibly can. If you're not and you actually believe they're a great person, you'll be much more specific and be like something much more specific about how they've been a great mentor to you. Cover your ass kind of answer. You might say, oh yeah, he's great, like don't know him super well, but like he seems to have a good reputation.
Superclusters is where we demystify the secrets, stories, and tactics behind the money that moves the venture capital world. Welcome back, Superclusters fans. And you know that feeling when you walk out of a conversation and you're still buzzing from all the dopamine from it? That's this one right here. Dan Stolar is a principal at Colibri, backing both founders and fund managers at the earliest stages, and boasts a portfolio including the likes of Courtside Ventures, Pathlight Ventures, Original Capital, just to name a few. From writing case studies back at the University of Michigan to rising up the ranks through Alpha Partners, a theme that consistently pops up throughout his career, but also his life, is the motif of relationships first. Something you'll realize pretty quickly in our conversation when we talk about his high school scavenger hunt. And yes, you heard that right, high school scavenger hunt. And through that, the nuance of human nature and incentives. So this is a really special one, as I've had not just one, but two extraordinary people in my life recommend that Dan be on the podcast independently of each other. So from how he diligences managers with other LPs to why the underwriting for a Fund 2 looks different from a Fund 1, to the difference between managers that can raise and managers that should raise, we leave very few stones unturned. So, without further ado, Dan, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
There's a lot of places we can start. And I actually told you in our pre-chat, I was like, I had all these questions prepared, and that was going to be the first question I was going to ask you when the podcast actually started recording. And in our email exchange last night, you shared something too good for me not to ask you about. So if it's a good enough of a teaser and a lead-in, could you tell us a little bit more about the scavenger hunt in your senior year of high school?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I actually emailed you 45 minutes before the call, not last night. So
okay, you know what?
A little bit last minute on my end, but sorry about that.
Beat the iron while it's hot. That's what they say, right?
Exactly. So yeah, senior scavenger hunt. So I grew up in Fair Lawn, New Jersey, Bergen County, awesome town, Cutter pride. But there's a tradition of the senior scavenger hunt. It's this, big list, and you do it as a senior. It's like a lot of fun, hazing-like stuff, some things that, are in the gray area of legality, and some that are just like, find a traffic cone, or like, find a way to get a tractor trailer to the parking lot, or get a member of the Jersey Shore on the phone line. And it's really fun. Everyone looks forward to it. My junior year, one of the items, and I wasn't at the scavenger hunt, but one of the items was to get a smart board. Like one of those ones you have like in a high school classroom or like teacher, like you draw stuff on it. And a group of kids broke into the high school and stole one, and they brought it, to the parking lot where you collect all the goods, and somebody ran it over with a Hummer. And it became a whole scandal in town, and the town did not want the scavenger hunt going on anymore. They're like, this is dangerous, these kids are idiots. And the next one that would have happened was my senior year, which I absolutely wanted to happen. And the principal was like, you guys aren't doing it. The police were like, we're not going to sanction it. And the person who runs it is the president of the student body president, which was this girl. She's great, but she did not want to take the risk of getting in trouble with the police. And I was president of National Honor Society, which if you're trying to maintain credibility in front of the town, might be a little bit better. And I was friends with enough people where I could get everyone together. And I'm like, okay, let's do this. And we'll do it in a really clean way and make sure there's no hidden list of things we're not telling them about. And then we'll do something which we don't do, which everybody pays $10 so people can win a prize at the end. I said I was going to double that, and we're going to hold half of it until after the scavenger hunt in case we destroy anything to cover damages. So it wasn't like an insurance policy, but it was a makeshift insurance policy that was able to get us comfort. And we spent time talking to the police, we spent time talking to the principal, and we finally got them begrudgingly to let us have the scavenger hunt. And I believe it still continues to this day. I think they haven't had issues. I don't know if they still do the insurance policy thing, but it went off. Nothing got damaged. Actually, I think one person's car got damaged, but they were a participant in the scavenger hunt, so it was fine.
That's insane. What was the prize? Like, was there a prize for the scavenger hunt? Is that why people were so motivated to perform tasks they wouldn't normally do?
Oh yeah, you get the whole buy-in at the end. So all the money that was put into the pot, so it was like $10 for the prize, $10 for like in case damages.
And how many people typically participate in the scavenger hunt? Is it like the whole school? Is it like some, like, I don't know, 20, 30% of the school? Like, what happens?
It's probably about like 70% of the senior class. So probably like 100 to 200 people. Yeah. And then there's like people bring others into it. Like you'll bring a freshman. You might bring like, there might be a specific item for a freshman to do, for a sophomore to do, for a junior to do. It was probably a couple hundred people in that parking lot. It's behind our bowling alley.
Is there anything about, per se, that experience, if we were to draw things more with broad strokes, where it has helped you better navigate tough conversations today?
Yes, for sure. And this isn't really something I've thought about, but I think being direct with people instead of beating around the bush, it might suck in the moment, but you'll feel much more relieved afterwards. Like there's a lot of tough conversations in this industry that you have to tell people you like no. I think that's my least favorite part of this job, is that like you might build a really strong relationship with someone and still have to pass on them because you might just be overexposed to their sector. There might be something about their portfolio construction you don't like, but you love them and you think they will do well. That doesn't mean they're a fit for you. Like you're only going to do so many investments, being at a family office or a permanent pool of capital. At some point, like every year we do more venture, we will get slower, just by the nature of that. And so you end up having to tell people no for reasons that aren't about them, and they might not even view as a good answer, but you have to tell them anyway.
And so to kind of, if we could ease our way into the world of, let's say, venture and capital allocation, as someone who's been around excellence for quite a while since you were young, from obviously becoming president as a junior in high school to being in the same college club as Alex Lieberman, who now runs one of the most successful email newsletters in the world. And I'm curious, has there anything about your early upbringing or friend groups that has taught you about recognizing excellence today in other fund managers?
The thing about excellence in my mind is that whether or not someone's hardworking, you can tell, I think, a lot about someone's transactional ability, or like how transactional they actually are, correlates to how successful they're going to be, especially in this industry. And I think some people are very deliberate about, I only give what I can take. And some people give without the expectation of getting anything in return. And I think those people who are always generous with their time, generous with helping people, like even helping someone study for an econ exam or helping them with like a finance class, they're not getting anything out of it. They just know they want to help this person. Like when I think of people who really thrived and who are doing great, thinking back to Michigan and who's doing great now, it's not people who were like the best at studying or the best at like acing a test and finishing before everybody. It's the people who like elevated the people around them to do better. And I think those, like when you see people like that, that's who you want to anchor yourself to. And, the answer might be different if I was looking at hedge funds or spending more time there. But,
right.
In this type of industry, who you lift up is a much better indication of how good you are. And like, I forget who told me this quote. It's like, you can judge how good somebody is not by how much money they made, but how much money the people around them made. And that's something that's really stuck with me when I'm like thinking about like, why don't I like this person? Or like, why is there something I'm not getting here? Because like they've clearly done well. It's when you look, a lot of times, their employees might not have done well, or like their co-investors might not have done well. And I think just if you can, a rising tide lifts all ships. And I think if they apply that mindset to things, you can kind of just see those people and how they interact with the world.
Are there telltale signs of someone who is who constantly is that rising tide that raises all ships kind of thing in the first meeting you have with the manager?
I don't know if it's the first meeting. I think giving introductions, like how people approach introductions without expecting something in return. Like if you introduce people to like your LP, like let's say you're a GP and you introduce me to your LPs, not because I'm at the final stage of diligence, but because you think we'll just interact and, we both invest in sports teams, or like we're both focusing on emerging managers, and just connecting me without any expectation, I think that's a really good sign. You also see, if you dig into how GPs introduce their LPs to other GPs, I think is a really interesting thing to dive in on. Because when I used to be at a venture firm called Alpha Partners, and I remember there were some GPs that would want to trade introductions to LPs, but it would be a very explicit one-for-one intro to intro. And I find those people who really focused on that, I get why they're doing it. You have to guard your LPs in some way, shape, or form, but LPs want intros to other GPs. And it's a great sign when I see people introducing me to other funds, even if I didn't invest in their funds. And actually, I know one investment, I remember introduced me to another fund that we did end up investing in. And only later did we invest in that first fund that did make the intro.
And so you mentioned one element of recognizing excellence, at least early on, is how much of a giver they are rather than a taker. Are there other telltale signs of excellence as you're looking through either in diligence or in conversations you have with a manager that tells you hey, you know what, they'll have a good batting average, or they'll have maybe not batting average, not the right term for it, but they'll likely perform well in the future because how they act as a human being?
Yeah. I don't know if it's as much acting as a human being, but it's how they talk about their portfolio. I find the funds we like most do not mention who led the round or the co-investor. I find a lot of GPs, and I get why they're doing it because it's to sell to a lot of other LPs, but we invested in company X and Sequoia led the round in the Series A. And they won't really talk about what the company does. Or Sequoia Excel, name your tier one venture firm. And they're very proud of that. And they should be, but they don't really talk about why they had conviction in the investment. They talk about who the co-investors are and who's marking it up, which is great. But I find some of the funds that we have liked the most, they'll mention it, but it's a very quick mention. And it's usually towards the end of them talking about the company. And you could tell that they are much deeper with the company. They're much closer with management. They understand why they did the deal. I also find that this comes from a lot of funds who lead their own deals or take a higher ownership. And it's something I look for in funds. And that originally came to me naturally. And then it got verified as I networked with more and more LPs who are looking for that same kind of, higher ownership, higher concentration fund. That, that's kind of what I look for. And it came from those people who were able to talk with conviction about their investments without mentioning their co-investors.
I'm curious for you, and speaking of kind of managers in which you back, I think earlier this year, Colibri, you guys backed Exponent Founders Capital, which is, I'll be honest, a little bit of a mouthful.
They actually rebranded last week to Pathlight Capital.
I love it. Thank you so much, because I was reading this oh man, Exponent Founders Capital, that's a bit. So Pathlight Capital, and probably by the time this kind of podcast goes out.
I think it's Pathlight Capital. It might be Pathlight Ventures. I probably should know that, but this just happened last week.
Hey, it's hot off the press, right? At least it's hot off the press for us. And if people really want to check timestamps of when these episodes happen, feel free to do so.
Pathlight Ventures.
Pathlight Ventures? Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, they're founded by two great operators, obviously one formerly at Plaid and another one formerly at Robinhood. And I know Charlie and Madi both have great angel track records, even going into their fund one. And I believe earmarked for late 2021, give or take. But I'm curious for you, what does the underwriting look like when it comes to backing second time institutional investors instead of just first time?
Yeah, so they were interesting. A lot of what I just said actually applies to them in both of the past stories. Both they introduced me to a fund called Blank Ventures, which we committed to before them, and then we committed to Pathlight, then Exponent after that. And they're one of those firms that can talk about their investments without mentioning their co-investors in a really, really nice way. So props to them. What does it look like for them? I think I met them in a really unique moment when they weren't fundraising. So I met them between Fund 1 and Fund 2. So they were able to build a relationship when they had nothing to ask of me. And so by the time they actually did come to market, they were, I was up to speed on them. So the diligence was a little bit different. And they had a track record I could look at. I think for a Fund 2, the biggest thing I look at is, did you do what you said you were going to do in Fund 1? Which they did. They had the ownership they were going for. They did the exact type of investments they marketed. They were co-investing with great investors and people were marking up their deals. They were pretty much on theme with their industry. And there were some things they changed. And And they specifically addressed that in that fund 2. I think they even had a slide on it. And it's something I look for in fund 2 is it's like, what did we learn from fund 1? And they were very good about talking about that. They also had a uniquely institutional set of LPs that we could reference, and we could see how they had treated them. I mean, I'm not going to I don't know which LPs I can and cannot mention, so I'm not going to. But I have a few relationships.
We'll let compliance do their work, and so yes, we can keep things broad and generic.
Yeah,
for
but
now.
They had some for a fund 2 of their size, they had some very institutional LPs. And being able to actually talk to those people and look at the references that they did, and what type of work they've done on their end, because we don't really look at traditionally institutional funds. Almost all my time is with emerging managers, so there usually isn't a huge track record to underwrite. For them, specifically, Charlie has a huge angel track record, and being an operator at 3 companies, I had a lot of people I could reach out to about him. And, Madi is great as well, but I had less connectivity points to him. Charlie, I sent out 15 texts and just got positive thing after positive thing after positive thing from people who had no idea I was even an LP, and just I had met in different points of my life. So for them, they were still an emerging manager, but they had really stuck to their guns. They ran their process in a much more institutional way than other people. They raised their fund well before they needed to, and it didn't activate. They did a final close and they didn't activate the fund until the beginning of the next year. So, which was very different than most of the funds I actually meet and talk to, and that I think they're one of the only funds that have done that.
I'd probably say so. A lot of people they get to a first close and they immediately start deploying, or they start warehousing deals where it's the understanding that they will these will roll into whatever fund they're raising for.
Oh yeah, and they also were able to use FOMO in a much better way than other people, if I'm being honest, because they had
a fund
that they were able to stick. I think they had real deadlines that their fund would eventually hit a full target and hit their, hard cap. And if you weren't in, you weren't getting in. And so if you didn't go through your process in a fairly quick way, there was a chance you wouldn't be able to invest in their fund, and you don't know what the future funds look like or if they'll have another chance. So they were able to run it in a much tighter timeline than a lot of other GPs and be very intentional about it, which is a great position to be in as an emerging manager, and not one many managers are in.
In your experience, it sounds like it's not typical that managers go hey, we're closing our fund in the next, 2-3 months. Rather, they'll be hey, we'll just keep going until we get to a final close. Am I right in that assessment, or is it a little bit different?
I think you're right in that assessment. I think managers have often try and set deadlines, especially fund ones. It's their first time doing it, and they try and really move LPs along. I would say I can name 2 funds that actually stuck to that deadline. And almost every, if I pass on a fund due to timing, I will usually get an email that they extended the fundraise. And it's not a great mindset to go in with, and it's not one I try and abuse. And, I'm always trying to improve. But somebody recently told me this quote and I loved it. And it's getting an LP is pulling a weight with a string of thread. And if you pull too hard, the string snaps. And if you don't pull hard enough, you don't move the weight at all. And it's this very careful balancing act of moving people along in a process.
Yeah.
And the second you push too hard, they just go away. And I think you might have said this in our pre-chat or even before, we don't need, as a family office, we do not have to deploy a certain amount of capital a year. We don't have to do anything. So if the timing pressure is there too much and we don't feel comfortable, we'll just pass.
What does a no that turns into a yes look like?
I think it's a strategy that might have been a little, it might be a weirder fund model that I didn't think much of at first, or I just saw the deck or the blurb and I'm this probably isn't a fit for us, but let me take a call with them because it was referred by someone I like an LP friend of mine or something of that nature. And then you build a relationship with them and you might see that there's just a lot more to them as a person once you meet them. They might have just an incredible amount of hustle. And, one fund, actually Original Capital, I think was one like this, where at first I'm this is not going to be a fit for us. But after meeting Sumit, I'm this guy has one of the most incredibly unique energies I've seen. And his fund model was very different, where it was a hugely diverse pool of investments at seed and highly concentrated investments at Series B out of that portfolio. And he was great. But I think when I first got the email and read through it, I didn't think there was a good chance we were going to get there. And I think it took more than one call to really get me oh, this guy really stands out from other people.
And if you could walk us through the behind the scenes or the scaffolding there, Like, you got the email from Sumit, you said no. What did your no look like? Did you just say like didn't fit our strategy, and then you moved on?
No, when I'm saying no, I mean it's like a mental no. Like I got
Okay.
an intro from somebody else to him. Like somebody offered me
Uh-huh.
an intro, and I'm like, okay, I respect this person. I'll take the call. In my mind, it's like this is probably not gonna. We're probably not gonna get there. And I think after the first call, I was really impressed by him. I wasn't sure on the fund model, but as I started, doing reference checks, meeting the founders, talking to other people about him, I happened to have a lot of connectivity points. He was at, Insight for a few years with people like Spencer Peterson and Vinny Pujji. He was at Chief Strategy Officer of Cardus, Chief Strategy Officer of Instabase, and he's just an incredibly high hustle, high energy, really unique person. Um, and just, holds himself differently and like doesn't really care about what other people think. And I just really love that about him. And as I got to know him more, I could tell like he was an incredibly sharp investor, knew why he was doing all of his deals, knew how he was helping founders, knew what his weaknesses were and knew what his strengths were, and just played into both of those. And he just really stood out. At first mentally, I'm like, I'm not going to get there. But as I had him come in, he met the team, and like we as a group just kind of got there together.
I want to touch on the thread of diligence and reference checks and all that, because that's something you talked about earlier. There are two questions I want to ask here. One is, let's say with Pathlight, you were able to call on a bunch of like references at different companies, and because he'd operated in a bunch of areas.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing I want to talk about is just like the art of diligencing with other LPs who are institutional in nature. So I'll touch on the first one. You said you texted 15 people and then people got back to you with really positive references. I've heard from multiple LPs on the show already, and even just in other conversations, that there are some LPs that will keep doing references until they can get to a negative reference or a neutral reference, because like in many ways, in doing reference, and this is something I do as well, you're always going to get positive references. I mean, not always, but like you're more likely to get positive references because there's no incentive for someone who might be a stranger to you or might know you fairly loosely to say something negative about someone else. How do you navigate through the nuance of a purely positive reference, and how much weight do you actually put on the purely positive reference?
So I think it's how their level of positivity and what they're actually saying. Like you need to read between the lines a little bit. I think if you're giving a general positive reference on someone, you might not like them, but it's in your best interest to be positive. You'll keep it as brief as you possibly can. If you're not, and you actually believe they're a great person, you'll be much more specific and be like, I love working for them. I've been working for them in 2 years. I just moved on to their team, and it's been like an amazing experience so far. Like, I don't know, something much more specific about how they've been a great mentor to you or things like that. And then, but if I'm giving like cover your ass kind of answer, you might say, oh yeah, he's great. Like, don't know him super well, but like he seems to have a good reputation here. Like, that's what I would say is like a reference that means nothing to me. The first one I said is much more in detail. Like, you can tell that they are attached to the person and view them highly. I also don't mind a negative reference check. I just need to know why it's a negative reference check. Especially people who are in managerial positions at companies. What makes them like, a lot of times they're very high hustle, high energy individuals, and people under them might not appreciate that, or might not appreciate like their level of excellence. And it could turn into like, a lot of VCs just aren't great managers, and that's okay. And like getting references from people below them that they don't love them is not always a bad thing in my mind. It just shows their personality just might not have been a fit for the firm. But understanding why that negative reference check came in is very important. If you get consistently bad reference checks, that's a problem.
I was diligencing a manager earlier this year and got like a bunch of positive references about this manager. And there was one, and I like almost like, in all fairness, I talked about like 12 people, and I couldn't find a negative reference on this person. But there was one positive reference that like, I don't know if I was being superstitious or I was thinking too much, to be completely honest. Right. But the person was like, hey, yeah, would totally back her myself. I was just super excited for her. And she's very strategic. And to me, that she's very strategic, I don't know, for some interesting reason, like there was, you can call it intuition, you can call it whatever it is. I was like, well, like a synonym for strategic is potentially transactional. Like she's very strategic with her relationships. And so kind of like that led me down a rabbit hole of like, how do other people think of her and how does she turn down opportunities that were not a fit for her or LPs that were not a fit for her kind of thing. Ended up still getting a lot of positive ones. And turns out that I was just like, I was being overly superstitious.
Totally. And some people some people will seem very authentic as your friend until you pass on them.
Yeah.
And then you don't hear from them again. And that's how you handle a no is also like a really good sign of like, is this someone I want to look at for their next fund?
Speaking on the other thread I was mentioning earlier, like diligencing GPs with kind of LPs that you already know. When you know like an LP who is already committed to a GP and you're currently diligencing that GP, is there a set of questions you would ask your LP friend to understand how they got to conviction that would help you get to yours? Or what do typical conversations look like?
Yeah, I would say like what other funds. So first thing I try and look at is what other funds did you look at that were comparable to them? Like if it's a fintech fund, like did you do a landscape of a fintech, like solo or like emerging manager environment? If the answer is no, it might be a relationship check, which is fine. Or it might be someone who's like strategic to you. Like you might come from a banking family and there's some sort of, collaboration you can have with the underlying GP. So it's like, what other work did you do on the other managers? Then it's like, how do they fit into your portfolio? I'm pretty brazen just asking if they wrote an investment memo, can they share that with me? Some will say yes, some will say no, and I can actually read through all of the work they did. One of my favorite calls where it was a GP we ended up not getting there on, but it was someone I'm very much tracking for their next fund. I talked to their main investor and they sent me 45 pages of reference notes. And
wow.
I'm like, that's incredible. And I read through it all and I'm like, how do I put this into my own memo? And that was my first time using ChatGPT, was uploading those 45 pages and having it summarize it for me. And I'm like, all right, this is going to change the world. Like, I'm excited to learn more about this. Right. But yeah, I think that's a lot of it. It's like understanding what don't I know and like who else have you talked to about it? Because a lot of times there's like red flags about investors that you just don't know. There's like backstories that, especially if people are coming from bigger funds, understanding why they're leaving that fund is like a big thing. And you might not be able to get the story unless you're involved with them. Or like know someone who's an investor in that, underlying fund. Like if they're a GP leaving a tier 1 firm, like why? There's great reasons. If they're a principal leaving, it's also very different. And it's like, I don't know, getting the real backstory on who these people are and who might have beef with them is really what it's about. And you end up talking to a lot of LPs about a fund and the 6-month process you're talking to them. What
are examples of reasons why, let's break down like job titles, right? Why a principal would leave a firm, why a partner, like junior partner would leave a firm, and why a GP would leave a firm. And I'll like buy you some time. At least I've talked to a couple principals leaving their firm as of late. And it seems like a large part of this is like the carry just isn't distributed to them. They don't get the kind of the carry on the deals in which they win. And they kind of like, we have a good eye. I want better economics for the kind of the work I'm putting into these investments. Are there other examples of why someone would leave a firm?
Yes. I think it's actually less economically driven and more that there just isn't room for them to be promoted from where they are. Like the way the venture firms work, like I think it made a lot more sense in 21 to stay at a big firm as like AUM was growing and, everything was going great. Partnerships were expanding, new investors were coming in. Then the market turned and people raised smaller funds and they aren't going to expand the GP. They're not going to expand like partnership track and you're going to have to sit there for a whole other fund cycle. And I think for a lot of people who are ready to get that next step, it's very difficult to like stomach that because like that's another 3 years of waiting, maybe even 4 years. In 2020 and 2021, that was like, maybe 1 year of waiting. But now it's like you have to wait a whole other cycle. And then there's other people who know that the writing's on the wall and they're not going to ever make it to that next step. And then it's very hard to move around at some of those seniorish levels. And so they'll end up doing something, they'll raise their own pool of capital. And those are the people you have to really understand, why are they doing it? Like, are they doing it because they can or because they should? And like, they've always wanted to raise a fund. And some people, like you have to really figure out, like, did they have a path up at this tier 1 firm? And if not, like, what are they doing differently? Or, can they have a successful investment track record if you strip out the brand name that they lean on?
So there are two words that you use I find to be very interesting. And I'd love for you to expand on both of them. You mentioned that there are some people who leave and they raise a fund because they can. And then there are other people who leave a firm and they raise a fund because they should. How do you differentiate between a can versus a should?
I think you have to spend a lot of time with them. So because they can, let's say they have capital relationships, either from, family background or just general network. They might have been an operator they might have been really early at a unicorn and have a lot of people that are backing them just because they like that. And they just go out and raise a fund. They're doing it because they can raise the capital, but they might not have that investor training that's there. I think you see those with ex-operators and more junior VCs that go on to raise their fund. Like they have some sort of way to get capital and they go and, then they go out to the open market and it's clear they're just not at the same level as a lot of the other people raising capital. Like they can't talk about their companies in the same way. They, aren't as plugged in as they think they are, as you think they are. They might be running a very, a much more co-investor driven strategy. I'm not saying those are bad, but you often see those people doing that because it can be a little bit easier to get access with smaller checks. And they might have a great angel track record that they're leveraging. But they were small, $10, $15, $20,000 checks. Not saying that's a small amount of money, but when you go out to market with a fund that's going to write 10 to 20 times larger checks, that's a really hard thing to prove. And then you have people that doing it because they should. And the people that do it because they should is like they have a strategy that's now different than their firm. They've clearly executed on it. Their firm might be moving on or might have grown too much in AUM. And they've clearly just been destined to be like, they clearly could have been on that partner track, but chose to get off of it. And like, I try and think about like, what do the GPs at like the mega funds look like and how do they talk? What are they looking at? How do they interact with companies? And I try to like, do the people I'm backing have a path to become that person? Like, what does that path look like? And they might not be there yet, but they might be growing into them. And those are the funds you want to be in before they become a funds you can't get in.
I need to sit down tonight at dinner and just like think about that for a minute. But that's really insightful from that wavelength. And I want to be cognizant of time as well. And actually probably ask you one more question that I would kill myself if I didn't ask you that question. But I came across an interview that you did last year that you typically say no to funds who have invested in logos. And I quote, but they did not have a relationship with management and oftentimes got into the deal through a process that wasn't repeatable or scalable. And so I'm curious for you, are there any examples of unscalable investment opportunities from a fund perspective? And how do you suss those out during conversations and diligence?
Yeah, I think it goes back to a little bit of what I just said about like check sizing. And like, you'll see people put, they're raising a pre-seed or seed fund. And then they have, Series B and Series C logos that are very prominent in their deck of deals that just aren't indicative of what their strategy is going to be. It's like, that's not going to be in the fund I invest in. Like, it might be an indication of an SPV I might get from you, but this clearly isn't how you're going to be investing going forward. And it's not what I'm looking for from you. And then you see people that have these, great angel track records, but they're, again, small checks that are much easier to get in through a relationship. And that's just not how you like when you're able to be friendly with all these firms with a small check, that's great. But when you pitch a strategy where you're now going to be removing allocations from other people, that's a completely different game. And you're competing in a much different way. And something that I try and dig on is who do VCs compete with? Like when I'm going through my process, like where are you in the market? And I find VCs are really bad about answering this question. And it's because they all know each other and they're friends with each other.
Right.
And they don't want to talk down about anyone, but if they were to ask a company that, they want a very direct answer and they want to know they want to see a competitive matrix. And, if you're not going to give me that answer, I'm going to end up having to do it myself and like lay out, like, I keep going back to fintech because we just did a lot of work in fintech and we ended up backing like 3-ish managers. But like, where do they all stack up? Like, how do they interact? Like, do they compete? Do they not compete? And a lot of people just say they don't compete with other investors. And I think that's just like a pretty bad answer because you're always competitive. Like very few entrepreneurs don't have a way to talk to multiple VCs these days. And so like, why are they taking your money? And Yeah. So I guess that's a long way of answering, small checks, buying logos just so you can like flaunt that you're in them is a really not scalable process. I'm not saying it's a bad investment strategy, but
Yeah,
you're not going to raise like institutional capital on that.
that makes sense. And actually, one of those things that I actually think make VCs competitive, but it's hard, in my opinion, to put on a competitor slide is
Mhm.
responsiveness. And I have seen many an investor win a deal because they purely just responded to the founders faster. They were up at, I don't know, 11 p.m. midnight, and there's like, I'm going to get to you. Or they didn't take
Mhm.
time off during the weekends, and they just won deals that way. And I understand for a lot of investors or GPs, like that is hard to describe in a way because to an LP, everyone can say that they are responsive to a founder before you do your kind of diligence and homework.
I don't really look at that as much. One, because I'm
Okay.
not the best at being responsive to people. Like my inbox and text messages are always blowing up for a variety of reasons, and something I'm actively working to improve on. But there's definitely some people who are like, Dan needs to be more responsive, and we're working on that. Um, but I think it's just hard to like some GPs. You need to be like the thing with a GP versus an LP is like your processes are much more time bound. Like,
Yeah.
and I think I've talked to you about this before, but I think GPs and LPs are both equally busy, but different kinds of busy. Where on any given day, we'll probably have the same amount of calls, all these things going on, but I'm going to know I'm busy 3 months ahead of time, and a GP won't. Like a lot of their things come up much more soon. So like I don't have to be as responsive to people, but GPs like they win on being, dealing with things in a very discrete amount of time. My processes can be a year and a half long. It's like it's something I don't anchor on, but yeah, it's not something I really assess that much.
Okay.
But I notice that GPs are like I'll let my email build up and then go through it, and then I'll have 20 answers all from the GPs in the next like 20 minutes, and it's like, oh, how are you guys so fast? I don't get it.
I will say, if you, and I speak as someone who likes inbox zero, that
Mhm.
actually my partner in life and I have very different kind of ways of how we respond to messages. I see her inbox and it's like tens of thousands of unread emails, and I'm like, I
Mhm.
can't deal with you. Like, I don't know how someone deals with this. And she looks at mine and she's like, how do you even get to zero by the end of the day? And the whole thing is like, I think I've never let my email inbox get past like 200 unread. I have this really quick philosophy, and actually Blake Robbins, speaking of someone we spoke about earlier, has a great really process of like, you either archive it, you read it, you read later, or you respond to it right there and then, right? And there are
Mhm.
some investors who are really good at that process, and as long as you keep it below a certain number, it just feels manageable. Versus if my partner were to give me her inbox and she's like, respond to these 20,000 unread emails for me, I don't know where to start. I don't think I'd ever want to start.
Yeah. No, it's that I think a lot of LPs fall into the bucket of letting their email build up. I think it's
Yeah.
because I think there's not that many people who focus just on venture. So you're getting emails about a variety of things. And if you do the read later thing, like that read later becomes overwhelming. Like there's just
Yeah.
too many people who are too good at following up. And so you have to like triage in different ways. And but you have to give yourself time to get through your email at some point. It's difficult. And
Yeah.
it's actually something like if you're in a circle of LPs, like with no GPs around, like people will talk about this as like a really big problem that they have to deal with. And like inbox overload is a thing because, when a GP passes on a deal, the deal's done. Like you're not going to see that company again. When I pass on the fund, I might see that fund for another 12 years. And so like I'm going to be on those updates and, doing those check-in calls, and they're great and I'm happy they're reaching out. But it's very easy to overwhelm your calendar by like, talking to people you want to talk to, but very quickly you look out and you're scheduling people, it's September 25th now and you're scheduling people into November already. And it's hard. It's a hard thing to manage. And then you do all those calls and then it's like, all right, when am I going to find time to answer all these emails and then do the work?
I actually think either an automation or an EA helps
Totally.
immensely, or
No, totally.
VA helps immensely for this. And I've actually spent time with LP friends of mine purely just like, how do you train a virtual assistant in the first 2 weeks or the first month to think like you in a way where they can answer 90% of your emails?
Oh
And
yeah. No, it's
that is
something.
a huge unlock.
The person I've met who's best at this is Charles Hudson at Precursor. I think he is one of the most lovely people I've met, and two, just like I remember him describing his processes, and it's really incredible. He's someone I think of when I think of someone who could manage a variety of communication channels, and yeah, he's someone if you haven't talked to him that I would definitely talk to about it.
He is also like the godfather in many ways for a lot of emerging fund managers. Like just the amount of insights he shared, to kind of just like Charles is great. If I were to add another person to that list who's just remarkable at communication, Sunil Pai, who runs this thing called Angel Collective Opportunity Fund. He used to be a GP at Angel List.
Yeah, I know him and Nick, his other partner. I've spent time with them in the past. Love their model. Like really, really good group.
Yeah, super smart. And like I think they're really taking the business model of venture and trying to like reinvent something from it. Anyways, now as we're getting closer to curtain call, I'd love to like finish off this conversation with just like two kinds of questions that take us away from venture for a second and just about Dan as a human being. So one, as someone, and I remember stumbling across this, like, oh, this is, I don't know anyone who has done this, but as someone who's once answered all 12 questions correctly on HQ Trivia and split the $2 winnings with your roommates, is there a subject you are most proud of to know a lot about, but no one would ever guess?
I totally forgot I won that, and the days of HQ Trivia were excellent, and I miss those days. A subject that I know a lot about that people be kind of surprised. Honestly, like New York hidden gems I find are just, I think New York's gotten very commercial and like everything's done on resi and it's like hard to get into all these good buzzy restaurants. There's all these good mom and pop restaurants that like might not be featured in things, and just knowing about them is kind of hard. But as you know them and you can recommend them to people, like they're the experience that stand out. And if I don't cook, I don't really buy groceries because I'm just out a lot. And spending time like getting to know those owners and like meeting those various different, meeting people at those places, I think is way better than finding something off a list on Eater. And so like finding like Il Posto, Acanto, and Alphabet City, where people don't like to go to, like Alphabet City generally. I love it there. But a spot that's not on Resi, not on Open Table, you have to call to make a reservation. It's a husband and wife duo that run it. And like, I find that there's just a lot of places like that, where if you spend time walking around New York, that's kind of how you differentiate yourself between someone who's here for, a period of their life versus someone who plans to be here for a very long time. And yeah, I think it's just something I spend a lot of time doing, and I just like to go out and eat.
All right, you and we've got to go restaurant hopping.
Down.
When I'm next in New York. But for those who haven't spent nearly enough time in New York and are looking for these like hole in the wall mom and pop shops, would you have like 1 to 3 recommendations of that you would personally recommend to folks who want to look for their areas?
Yes. Il Posto Acanto, which is what I mentioned. I think it's the best chicken parm in the city. It is not on the menu. It might be on the specials on a given day, and if it's slow enough, they'll make it for you anyway. And the wife, she does all the cooking in the back. She writes up the specials every day, like these very cool, intricate descriptions. That one's awesome. And it's a great family-friendly restaurant that you'll run into a few VCs there that also know about it. There's one I'm thinking of that I run into them a lot there. And then my favorite ramen spot, which doesn't get talked about a ton. I guess it's gotten some attention, but they recently had a fire, so they've been closed for a bit. Tabe Tomo, also in Alphabet City. They have like a very thick ramen broth that don't go for lunch, like go for dinner because it's going to put you to sleep. But it's a 60-hour braised like pork broth. It's very Sukumin focused. So like dipping noodles. They have a ramen also, which is excellent. It's also really thick.
Right.
But they're known for their dipping noodles, and it's just incredible all around. A lot of stuff in areas that aren't super trendy. There's just a lot of places. Like I lived in Alphabet City for 4 years, so I know a lot of places that weren't very trendy then, but now are on like different lists on Eater. And so just like taking time to explore areas you don't typically go to is, don't go to these restaurants that are part of large ownership groups. Unless it's like for a corporate event.
Hey, if the owners of these shops are listening to this podcast, like hopefully you give Dan over here like a huge like friend discount.
Yes, Diego, I'm pointing at you.
Okay, as my maybe my last question over here. I don't think we've chatted much about this, but also something that is really, really interesting. You're an experienced cyclist. So, as kind of like someone who's cycled around New York, what makes biking in New York after a snowstorm uniquely thrilling?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say I'm an experienced cyclist. I'm an experienced city biker. I don't have my own bike. I only use City Bike. I have about 5,000 miles on it though, and I'm considered like a top 1% biker. I flex my stats on people sometimes. It's a lot of fun when somebody gets really confident, then I beat them with it. I like chaos, and I think it's very chaotic when it snows in New York, and it actually sticks. And just kind of navigating through all the chaos and traffic and knowing you're getting somewhere in the best possible way, as long as you're safe with it, is a lot of fun. And you just kind of see the madness of New York. And like, I think I made a tweet about this. I think that was right after SantaCon. So it's like everybody's on the street in their Santa outfits. You're biking through and seeing like Santa's fighting drunk people in the middle of the day. And it's just a lot of fun. Like, that's why I love it. Like, I love biking. Like right now it's the General Assembly, like the United Nations is meeting. And I bike by the UN every day going to work because our office is right by Grand Central. And it's, it's annoying, but it's also fun, shooting through the gridlock, wiggling past trucks and stuff while everybody is just stewing there. And, you'll sometimes argue with people and it's like having a coffee because you start getting a little screaming match. And you're just like, you start the day, it's like, all right, let's do this. Like, I've dealt with that. I'm ready to get to work today. So it's more about the chaos of after a snowstorm or during a snowstorm. And knowing you can do that, like what else can you do during the day?
And this episode, well, depending on when we release it, but is likely to go out possibly during snow season. And so for many reasons, this might be quite opportune for folks to be out there and city biking.
Oh yeah, it's the best. I hope to see you out there. Yeah, don't take an e-bike though, because I want those.
There we go. Dan, I appreciate you so much. There's so much, as I mentioned earlier, just like meat to the bone, things for people to mull on that I know people are going to reach out for various reasons. But because you're on Twitter, you're on LinkedIn, you have obviously your email out there. What's the best place if you just pick one place for people to reach out to you on, either as LPs learning to like build up their investment strategy, or I don't know, I'm sure some GPs are also watching as well.
Yeah, email's great. And LinkedIn's also fine too. I wouldn't message me on any other platform though. Like, I check my LinkedIn messages, not as much as I should. Email is also a really good option. If you have it, and if you don't have it, feel free to LinkedIn message me and I'll shoot you back my email and we can go from there.
Perfect. Or see him biking all around New York.
Or you'll see me biking. Feel free to flag me. Or at many happy hours and events. Always, I'm very approachable.
I love it. Thank you so much. And you're awesome.
Of course. So are you. Thank you for having me. This was great.
And till the next time, Superclusters, see you soon.
I think that's my least favorite part of this job, is that like you might build a really strong relationship with someone and still have to pass on them.
I want to give a special shout out to today's sponsor, Alchemist Accelerator. Backed by the likes of Coastal Ventures, Mayfield, Salesforce, just to name a few, Alchemist is the top B2B startup accelerator that's been around since 2012, backing founders from day one. And if you've been around for 12 years and running laser focused only on one industry, you build this incredible set of flywheels, and positive feedback loop is absolutely insane. We back the best enterprise talent who go on to change the world in which we live in, who then come back to their hometown, coach, and mentor the next generation of world-class enterprise talent. And don't take it just from me. Alchemist has backed the likes of LaunchDarkly, Rigetti, Privacera, MoEngage, FarmWise, just to name a few, many of which who have come back as mentors and coaches for the current classes of Alchemist. If you're curious and want to get more involved in the Alchemist ecosystem, check out alchemistaccelerator.com/superclusters. That's an S at the beginning and S at the end, and we'll include the link in the show notes below. Till next, stay awesome. It's David from Post here, and if you're tuning in from Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever podcasts find your ear, it'd mean the world to me if you left a review. For those from the YouTube universe, let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments, and it'd mean a lot to me if you could share this episode with just one other person who'd get a kick out of today's topics. I'm on the road to publishing to at least 100 episodes of Superclusters, so every comment, question, review helps me make this experience more helpful, exciting, and fun for you. And lastly, I want to share a quick disclaimer. The views expressed in this episode are for informational purposes only and are solely the views of myself and the guest alone. They are not representative of Alchemist Accelerator. None of the views expressed herein constitute legal, investment, business, or tax advice. Any allusions or references to funds or companies are for illustrative purposes only and should not be relied upon as investment recommendations. Consult a professional investment advisor prior to making any investment decisions. And that's all from me. See you on the next.